just going to put this out there. Tellarite doctors, best doctors. Hello interwebs, I hope you're all doing well. I am here to review the latest episode of Star Trek Prodigy, this time Season 1, Episode 12, Let Sleeping Borg Lie. And as the title implies, we are getting Borg, and I mean proper Borg this time, and I am so excited. I actually had to sit and think about it. I think this is the first time that we are getting like proper, like classic style Borg in modern Star Trek, because we've gotten little hints and teases of different kind of Borg, like Star Trek Picard in Season 1 gave us the Borg Reclamation Project. In Season 2, we got the Borg Roddy, and then we've even gotten like holographic Borg in Star Trek Lower Decks, but we haven't gotten like Delta Quadrant, like Borg, since Star Trek Voyager, well, actually Star Trek Enterprise, actually. So it's been a long road getting from there to here, but we are actually getting some Borg in this episode, and it was exciting and really cool to see, especially since we get our young Prodigy crew having to learn about the Borg and them not really knowing the menace and threat of them and learning about them, which fits the sort of Prodigy mindset of like teaching like new Trekkies about classic parts of Star Trek lore, but also adds to the threat of the Borg. And I thought that that was really, really cool. And not only that, it actually pushes forward our story in a really cool way and does great work for our character of Zero as well, and pushing their storyline and character development forward as well. So all of that is great, and I'm loving the sort of background stuff with actual like real Admiral Janeway going on here, with some fun little connections into different elements of Star Trek Voyager as well. So this episode was just really great on all of those fronts, and I'm just really excited to be back in Prodigy World, because I really think, you know, I love Star Trek Discovery and I have thoughts about Picard, but I really think out of all of these Star Trek shows, Prodigy is nailing their serialized storytelling, and this episode, I think, is a great indicative episode of that, where it is telling a cool individual story and yet moving everything forward in sort of the larger arc of the series as well at the same time. So just excellent job here, and I just loved seeing the return of our favorite alien threat. So, with that being said, I'm going to get into spoilers now, so if you have not seen the episode, jump ship here, don't get assimilated, and we'll keep going. So we start off our episode with the crew in the holodeck watching the final scenes of the sort of mid-season finale, where Gwen learned about the fact that the Protostar has this weapon on it that can destroy Starfleet ships. So it's sort of building off of what we saw last episode, where they learned that something weird was going on with the ship, and so they now have that information. So I'm liking that all of our crew is sort of up to date on all of that. And I love seeing Zero freak out at the potential of even their holographic self being shown to everybody, and thereby sort of erasing all of their minds and sort of getting upset about that. So it starts us off at a place of like understanding where Zero's coming at in this episode, that they're upset that they hurt Gwen, and sort of having that sort of worry on their shoulders, or like gaseous nebula shoulders, whatever you want to call it. Anyways, it was a good place to start off. Then we have our crew looking around the Protostar, trying to figure out where this weapon is, eventually finding this really cool like secret deck and this future technology. And I love the way that this was visualized as this like weird like circle thing that if you shoot it, it sort of breaks apart and protects itself. Just a very, very cool idea. But then they sort of ask the questions like, who can help us? Like, Starfleet can't help us, so what are we supposed to do? And then, of course, with a little bit of narrative contrivance, we have a Borg cube appearing out of nowhere. So, a couple things on this front. At first, I was like, why is the Borg not doing anything to them? It's just sort of a Borg cube floating there. I thought that they would get hailed and they would get the classic, like, Borg speech, like, resistance is futile and all that stuff, you'll be assimilated. And so I was like, oh, this is kind of weird. But we do eventually learn that this is a dormant Borg cube. So, that works for me. What doesn't work for me as much, and this is the one major criticism I have of the episode, and it's something I saw earlier in the series as well, is that this is a little bit of a narrative contrivance in terms of how this shows up. It's like, just when they need it, they happen upon a Borg cube. I would have liked a little bit more of an active thing, like maybe hologram Janeway saying, well, I know who might be able to help us, and then they go and find a dormant Borg cube, and that's how they sort of start off this adventure, instead of it just sort of being there, like literally like right outside the ship at the exact moment that they need it. It's something that happened last, I'll say season, even though it's technically the same season, where we sort of had the protostar jumping across the galaxy and just happens to land by the Ferengi lady who raised Dahl. Out of all the places in the galaxy they could have jumped to, it was right next to her. So it's a little bit of a narrative conceit problem that I think you could have just smoothed over with just a little bit of changing and tweaking. But whatever, it's a small thing. It leads us to a cool story. So from here, before we get into the Borg Cube storyline, I'm going to actually jump over to our Admiral Janeway storyline, as that's a little bit self-contained. So we have Admiral Janeway over on her ship ordering black tea instead of black coffee, which is totally outside of character for Janeway, but it is, if I'm recalling correctly, I may be misremembering, I believe it is a slight nod to Janeway in Star Trek Voyager's series finale, Endgame, because in that finale, we saw a future timeline where Admiral Janeway existed as well, and she was also drinking black tea because her doctor there, at that point, the doctor from Voyager, was telling her that she shouldn't be drinking coffee.
Fresh coffee. Would you like a cup? No, I gave it up years ago. I only drink tea now.
So a nice little reference and just continuity between those two things, even though we're in a different timeline. That makes perfect sense. Loved seeing that. And then we have Janeway going to look at the diviner, who is sort of sleeping and is sort of babbling nonsense incoherently, and sort of the Tellarite doctor, who's a great curmudgeonly doctor. Can I just say, what is it with animated Star Trek shows, and we have like curmudgeonly doctors between T'Ana and this guy in Prodigy? I'm not that I'm complaining, it's just kind of a funny little connection between the two there.
What the f is that? I don't know who that is. No, like Spock.
And I love him like calling out the Trill ensign, not the Tellarite ensign, with like, oh, you're sucking up to the Admiral. And Jamie's just like letting that go. And so we have that storyline set up, and the diviner wakes up at the last minute as they are about to figure out what happened to the Starfleet relay station from last episode. One thing to note as well here is that they said there was no survivors. So I'm like, is that Denobulan dude that we met last episode dead? Because that's kind of dark. Like, damn. I was hoping he'd be picked up by the crew here, but evidently not. Apparently that Denobulan guy's dead, so R.I.P. Denobulan dude. But from here, we have our Protostar crew going over to the Borg Cube. I loved the look of it. The animation looked fantastic. Definitely stealing from a mixture of both Voyager's look for the Borg as well as Star Trek Picard's, because the alcove had those like circular rings instead of the green ones that we saw in Voyager. So kind of a mix and match, and I really kind of enjoyed that. And then we have them exploring, learning a little bit about Jango Pogs, just sort of like, ooh, look at all this cool technology. And then they have to climb up to get to where they need to go to get the information about their sort of tech bomb thing on the Protostar. I forget what it's called, the future tech. And I was like, oh, the Borg couldn't have simulated turbolift, which is like, part of me is like, oh, that kind of makes sense and kind of doesn't, that the Borg wouldn't have turbolift, because it's like, why would they need to go to a different deck? They just, like, the Collective would just assign a different Borg on that deck. But it's like, oh, also, if all those Borg on that deck get wiped out for one reason or another, they need a way to get up there. So it makes sense, it doesn't, maybe they just didn't find a turbolift, but they climb up, they get to this central hub thing where the Collective is sort of nexused around. And I love that Jango Pog notices that there are no keyboards there, because why would there be on a Borg cube? Loved that. And then Zero decides that they're going to join the Collective in order to get the information that they need. And I loved the way that this was visualized. And I also, by the way, I should mention, I like that Zero was also saying, like, I used to be part of a Collective as well, so I can resist the Borg as better than anyone here. And I love the way that we get inside the Collective is like these like tentacles of like Borg stuff. The one thing I will say that I didn't love the voice of the Borg. I kind of like the more like multiple voice sound of the Collective we heard in Next Generation and Voyager. In here we don't get that as much, so it's just like kind of a singular voice. I didn't like that as much, but what are you gonna do? But Zero sort of like trying to get the information from the Collective, but slowly being assimilated, like saying we, not I, at certain points, I thought was a nice little subtle touch. But then our rest of our crew has to face off against the Borg, who are recognizing what's going on, and they sort of fight off, but they sort of don't get away, except for Gwen, who, by the way, Gwen gets like a little batleth thing during the fight with her like sort of liquid tool. I forget what it's called, but that was sort of cool to see that little batleth thing. And Gwen then has to not be a threat, which kind of goes against Gwen's nature. She likes to always be fighting, and so just getting her to be a little bit like less, like she just has to sort of go against her instinct to be ignored by the Borg. So a nice little tense moment there. And then then they go and she tries to stop the Borg, but they all get captured, and Zero is going to assimilate them because Zero at this point has been assimilated, but manages to fight it off by having a character moment with Zero sort of realizing that it's okay that, they didn't mean to hurt Gwen, and that Gwen understands and forgives Zero, and that they're part of a collective together. And again, this is a very Star Trekian message that, like, the collective that the Borg has is not the collective that the Federation and Starfleet type of people can build that sense of community, even amongst, like, infinite diversity and infinite combinations, instead of pressing everyone into a singular mold like the Borg. So, loved that moment, and Zero sort of saving everyone and bringing them back to the ship, and ultimately they realize that they can't remove this device from the protostar, so they need to figure out a way to do that before they can get to Starfleet. And Dahl's sort of being a little bit disappointed in the fact that he can't go and discover his information about his family just yet, but is going to have to figure out what to do first before they can get back to Starfleet. So that sets us off for the rest of the season as the Diviner wakes up and will now probably be working with Admiral Janeway to stop our protostar crew. So interesting moment there. That's my thoughts on Let Sleeping Borg Lie. Like I said, a couple nitpicks here and there, but overall another fantastic episode of Prodigy. I am loving this show, but I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Did you like Prodigy? Did you dislike it? Let me know. Beyond all of that, I hope you're all taking care of yourselves, and I hope you all live long and prosper, my friends.